Richard Nixon did not need a hidden microphone to record the Oval Office. The White House already had a recording system. Its purpose was to preserve presidential conversations. Years later, those recordings became evidence in Watergate trials. One entry makes the contradiction concrete. The Nixon Library Catalog identifies a conversation on Friday, June 23, 1972, in the Oval Office. It is cassette E2, segment 1, and it was used as Exhibit 1 in a Watergate prosecution. So the question is not simply, what did Nixon say? It is more precise. How did an ordinary record of a presidential conversation become part of the legal and political case that ended his presidency? The tape entry can establish a date, a place, participants, and a chain of custody through a trial exhibit. It cannot, by itself, establish every motive inside the administration or every fact about the broader scandal. That boundary matters because Watergate is often told as if one recording contains the whole answer. The National Archives finding aid makes the limit visible in another way. Its Watergate Special Prosecution Force records include a separate investigation of the famous 18.5-minute gap. A gap is evidence of absence in the record. It is not a substitute for the conversations that survive. The break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters on June 17, 1972, was followed by an investigation whose evidence connected the break-in to the Oval Office. The documented story then moved through campaign politics, the White House, and the institutions responsible for investigating presidential power. That movement is the reason the recordings mattered. A disputed allegation can remain a dispute. A preserved conversation can be dated, transcribed, subpoenaed, and tested against other records. The archive changes the argument from who says what happened to what does this record actually establish? The dispute was no longer only about the burglary. It became a records problem. Investigators and courts sought material controlled by the executive branch, while the presidency resisted producing it. The Ford libraries account records that the dispute reached the Supreme Court and that the tapes were ordered turned over. That is why the June 23 entry matters even before a viewer hears every word. It is an object in a chain, an Oval Office conversation, a catalog record, a trial exhibit, and a piece of evidence that could be compared with testimony and other documents. The evidence did not arrive as a neat confession. It arrived as a collection of fragments whose meaning changed when the court required the record to be produced. The 18.5-minute gap is memorable because it is easy to picture. A blank stretch where a recording should be. But the National Archives lists it as one investigation within a much larger prosecution force record. That distinction prevents a common mistake. The missing segment is not proof of every theory built around it. The surviving tapes, the catalog descriptions, the court exhibits, and the surrounding chronology have to be evaluated separately. In an evidence-led story, missing is a result. It is not permission to invent the contents. As the investigation and court process advanced, the issue became institutional. Could a president withhold records that were relevant to a criminal proceeding? The answer depended on the legal process, not on the administration's preferred version of events. The later consequence was political as well as legal. The Ford Library's timeline records that the crisis culminated in Gerald R. Ford's ascent to the presidency on August 9, 1974, after Nixon's resignation. That sentence is deliberately narrower than the familiar headline. No single tape, by itself, explains the entire resignation. The resignation followed an accumulation of evidence, proceedings, and political collapse. The tapes mattered because they could survive argument. They were records that other records could be checked against. The surviving record can tell us that a conversation occurred, where it was cataloged, how it entered a trial exhibit, and how it fits within a larger investigation. It cannot recover every erased minute, settle every private motive or turn uncertainty into certainty. The deeper reversal is simple. A recording system meant to preserve presidential memory also preserved evidence damaging to the administration. Watergate was not solved by a magical object. It was narrowed by records, dated conversations, official exhibits, subpoenas, court decisions, and the consequences that followed when the evidence could no longer be kept outside the process. If you prefer evidence over legend, the next case is already waiting in the archive.